Despina Katsikakis is Cushman and Wakefield's head of Occupier business performance, and she focuses on the rapidly changing context of work and its impact on employee engagement, productivity, and well-being. For many years, she led innovation, research, and implementation of transformative business environments, working with the thought-leading consultants DEGW. Now, there's been, in the last few weeks, there have been 3 major planning permissions given in the City of London for new office buildings. And this would suggest that the idea of the office in a central business district is still live and kicking. Do you agree with the investors' confidence?
Yes, interesting question, Peter, as always. Yes, absolutely. I do agree with it, but it needs to be actually put in context. I think it's important to recognize that over the last year, what we've learned from the enforced remote working of the pandemic is that work can continue to take place remotely. The majority of people have felt they could continue to focus and collaborate through tools like we're using today. However, the really critical aspects that make offices be of value to businesses are the things that we are really struggling with and we're missing. And that's really connection to colleagues, the ability to be mentored, to learn, to innovate, to have creative ideas together, to have serendipitous encounters, which actually give us joy throughout the day and expand our horizon. I think those elements are absolutely critical in terms of both the continuing evolution and success of corporations, but also to human beings. And therefore, when we think about cities, and there's been so much talk at the moment about is the city dead as a concept, you know, historically, cities have been incredibly resilient and have, you know, always bounced back from crisis in many ways, in reimagined ways. So I think that cities are going to continue to be critical for housing work, but they will not be the only place that work takes place in.
In New Office by Frank Duffy, who of course was the D in DEGW, the New Office was published back in 1997, and you were one of the contributors to that. And Frank talks about distributed sets of work locations which may be nomadic, mobile, in the office or in the home, linked by networks of communication in which autonomous individuals work in project teams. I guess that's really what you mean, and that's a pretty good description of what is about to happen, is it not?
Absolutely. There were 2 significant studies that we undertook in the mid-90s that informed that prediction, in fact. And in 94 to 95, we did a significant piece of work with Arab on looking at what do we mean by intelligent buildings and what could that be in the future. And we forecast that from 2005 onwards, there would be the opportunity to move from thinking of buildings as individual entities to thinking about intelligent networks. And once you begin to take this idea of an intelligent network of individuals connected by technology, you then break out of the building as a single node of requirement to be able to connect with others. We've definitely seen that come to life. It's not new, I should say. Obviously, we talked about it in the New Office, but even more importantly, we implemented that going back to 96 with Anderson Consulting, where we did the first implementation of a shift from metro locations to a recognition that a corporate real estate portfolio actually could be made up of CBD hubs supported by working at clients, working at home, working on the road, or having project teams located where they need to. This, I believe, will be absolutely what the norm becomes. We will now see the workplace being not just one location, but an ecosystem of both physical locations and experiences, which might be just virtual experiences, that supports our convenience, our functionality, and our well-being.
I just wonder what that means to the demand for offices, because it's over 20 years ago that the New Office book was published. It held worrying messages for office landlords who saw demand slipping away. But actually, over those 2 decades, really, demand has not diminished. Why didn't it? And what lessons does that have for today?
So there are a number of issues that actually impact that. First and foremost is that whilst technology mobility has been in play for a while, since the early 90s, there has been significant cultural lack of adjustment. So we know, for example, that if we just look at building utilization on average around the world has been 60% on a typical workday, which basically says that people are working in some flexible way. However, presenteeism cultures and lack of management trust has meant that we've continued to design offices at a one-to-one allocation of space, desk per person, and not fully embrace the flexibility that technology has enabled. The second aspect is that it goes back to the social, to the connection, to the reasons why we come together. And we actually published a book at DEGW immediately following the new office, which was called Design for Change, which looked at the work that we had been doing in thinking about those issues and how they would impact both the city and the office. And the hypothesis that we put forward at the time is that increasingly the city would begin to be leveraged more like an office through being able to touch down and use a variety of environments. But also the inverse would happen. The office would begin to be designed more like a city to bring together those, the serendipity, the surprise, the delight, the unexpected encounters that you have in cities. And we started seeing early models of that with BA Waterside, which was one of the first buildings to incorporate an actual street within the building itself. Now, fast forward to building just completed in the City of London, 22 Bishopsgate, which actually takes that same concept but applies it in today's environment. So the building becomes a vertical village, which activates community, sociability, connection with people within the building. So you have the building connecting to the city and then the building activating itself as a city. I think those elements will continue to drive demand. And to the question of the impact on landlords, we kind of saw a race to the bottom in the last few years. How do you squeeze more people into less space to save costs from corporations? I believe that that is going to shift to a race to quality. So in order to reinforce the distinction of your building, you need to create an inspiring destination where people actually want to leave their home and come to be. And that means focusing on much more allocation of amenities, of services, of events, a greater shift in the allocation of space from individual work areas to collaborative work areas. So that redistribution of space alongside the introduction of much greater activation, I think will rebalance the portfolio requirements.
If the office is like a city, does the workspace become like a home? Because the Central Behir offices by Hermann Hertzberger has always been in DEW's lexicon as one of the really important and radical alternatives to conventional offices. It's aimed to humanize the office environment, allow people to create their own worlds within worlds, with furniture for a home, murals, pets and plants. I mean, is that still a model? Because it doesn't really fit in very well with the sort of efficiencies that modern office needs of hot desking and that sort of thing.
Well, it's very interesting you raised Central Behir. It is still one of my favorite buildings in terms of connecting humanity to work. And I think one of the things that we need to recognize is that, of course, that building was designed and that concept was designed at a time when we did not have the technology interface that we have today, both in the way we work and in the mobility that technology creates. However, the more ubiquitous technology becomes, I believe the more we crave humanity and that connection to each other and to nature and to home and to all of these elements that make us feel human. And it's fascinating when you look at the design of office environments. Even in the last 5 years, they have become much more domestic in their look and feel. We've been taking a lot more influence from hospitality environments to bring that domesticity, that connection to humanity, much more nature, incorporating biophilic design, natural light, elements of nature in the building. So I think the two are not in conflict, Peter. I think efficiency will be gained through a more dynamic use of the space, which allows more people over time to use the environments. But the effectiveness and the experience will need to be able to support renewal, community, social activities, which will bring us back to those very much home-like experiences that Central Behir did. But rather than owning it as an individual, we will own it as a community.
Well, thank you, Despina, very much. Your advice has long been important for the shaping of the corporate workspace, but perhaps this is probably the most important time in many years that we've needed that sort of advice. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter.